The eye patch that sparked instant silence was more than a strip of black cloth. It carried a weight that settled over the range the moment she stepped onto the gravel. No one had expected her. The morning had been routine, the kind of day when sun glare sits on steel targets and the smell of spent powder hangs low. People were talking, adjusting gear, arguing quietly about optics and wind calls. Then she appeared at the gate. The conversations thinned out like someone had turned down a volume knob. There was no reason for it, except something about her presence told everyone to look twice. She moved with a calm that didn't match the place or the people watching her. Most newcomers keep their shoulders tight and their steps stiff, but she walked with the steady ease of someone who had learned the value of conserving energy. Her boots kicked up faint dust with each step, and her jacket hung unevenly because of the sling over her shoulder. The eye patch cut a clean shape across her face. It wasn't the costume kind or the medical kind with soft edges. It was sharp, fitted, and serious. It made you imagine the story behind it without knowing a single detail. Some of the regulars tried to pretend they were not staring. They checked magazines that didn't need checking or wiped lenses already clean. Others watched openly, trying to piece together whether she was military, retired, or something else entirely. The range had seen its share of tough people, but her silence and that single covered eye felt like a message they didn't know how to read. No one spoke to her. No one greeted her. It wasn't rudeness. It was uncertainty mixed with a strange respect that built itself before anyone earned it. She stopped near the benches and took in the layout like she was mapping every line, every firing lane, every backstop. Her good eye was sharp, the kind that didn't wander or hesitate. She blinked slowly as if she had all the time she needed. There was no ring of nerves around her movements. No glance over her shoulder for permission or guidance. She studied the downrange distance, the terrain, the targets swaying slightly from the breeze. You could see her mind making quick assessments, but her face stayed steady. People loved to assume things, and you could almost feel the guesses stacking up around her. Some thought she might be compensating with that eye patch. Others figured she must have taken a hit somewhere overseas. One man whispered that she was probably here for a beginner's course and would need help racking a bolt. Another man said nothing but kept looking at her boots, her stance, the way she carried her weight. He sensed something the others missed. The silence around her wasn't awkward. It was charged. The air held a strange tension, the way a quiet crowd watches a door before something important walks through it. She didn't look fragile or reckless. She looked like a person who had been shaped by something challenging and had walked straight through the middle of it. She set her bag down with careful intent. Not slow, not dramatic, just deliberate. The zipper sounded louder than it should have, probably because no one had resumed their conversations. She took out ear protection, gloves, and a notebook that looked like it had been through weather and travel. Her hands moved with the smoothness of someone used to working with gear, and yet she wasn't rushing. She was pacing herself the same way someone paces their breathing before a big decision. The instructors on the far end noticed the shift in the range's mood. They looked over and caught sight of her eye patch, then watched her the same way everyone else did. One of them raised his brows as if impressed without knowing why. Another folded his arms and waited to see what she planned to do. People who teach shooting for a living can usually read confidence or fear from 20 yards away. She wasn't giving them fear. She was giving them something harder to interpret, something that made them pay closer attention. The eye patch held the center of all that attention. It explained nothing but suggested a story with sharp edges. It made people reconsider their assumptions about what she might know, what she might have done, and what she was capable of. It wasn't a mark of weakness. It wasn't an accessory. It felt like a quiet signal that her vision may have narrowed, but her awareness had not. By the time she stepped fully onto the firing line, the silence had settled into something almost respectful. People adjusted their posture without meaning to. A few shifted their weight, trying to get a better look. The entire range felt like it had paused mid-breath, waiting for the next move she would make. The SEAL commander's wordless test began long before he handed her anything. It started the moment he noticed the way the range had shifted around her. He had been leaning over a spotting scope, talking through wind patterns with a pair of young shooters who hung on his every word. When the atmosphere changed, He felt it before he understood it. Years of training had wired him to sense tension in a room, even one as open as a firing range. He lifted his head, scanned the line, and saw her standing there with the eye patch and the quiet that followed her like a shadow. He did not stare the way the others did. His eyes made a quick pass, evaluating her posture, how she held her bag, how she positioned her feet. Little tells, small pieces that reveal more about a person's experience than a resume ever could. He watched the way she studied the distance and the targets. She did not fidget, did not shift nervously, did not mimic the behavior of someone trying to look like they belonged. She simply observed. He respected that more than anything spoken. He straightened up and let the two shooters beside him continue their conversation without him. They barely noticed he had gone quiet. He stepped away from his bench and walked toward her with the unhurried calm of someone who had led teams into places most people will never know. People made space for him without thinking about it. He carried that presence that comes from years of being the person others follow. She noticed him approaching but did not change her stance. She did not brace, smile, or force a polite introduction. She simply acknowledged him with a slight lift of her chin, as if prepared to meet whatever came next without flinching. He liked that. Not cocky, not timid, just ready. He stopped a few feet from her, enough distance to show respect, but close enough that she knew she had his full attention. For a moment he said nothing. The silence was not awkward. It felt like he was sizing up something that mattered. He studied her uncovered eye, looking for signs of hesitation or bravado. He found neither. Only focus. Most instructors would have asked who she was, what qualifications she had, whether she had signed in. He skipped all that. He ignored the checklist because he had already read her body language, and he trusted his instincts more than forms. Instead of speaking, he turned his head slightly toward the rifle rack sitting behind him. To everyone watching, it looked like a simple glance. To her, it was an invitation. She followed his eyes, saw the Barrett .50 resting on its stand, and held her breath only long enough to register the surprise. She did not step back. She did not look around to see if it was meant for someone else. Her gaze returned to him, steady. He walked to the rack without explanation. The Barrett sat there in its familiar bulk, a piece of steel that dominated any space it occupied. Most shooters admired it from a distance. Fewer wanted to try it. Even fewer could handle it. The commander lifted it with practiced ease, the kind that came from years of muscle memory. He checked the chamber, inspected the bolt, ensured the magazine was clean. His hands moved with calm precision. All the while, he kept her in his peripheral vision. He did not know her story. He did not need to. What he wanted to know was whether she carried the kind of presence that matched the rifle he was about to place in her arms. Not strength on paper, not physical size, but the mental steadiness that separated real shooters from the curious. When he returned to her, he held the Barrett by the upper receiver, the muzzle angled safely downrange. He did not give a speech. He did not ask if she was sure. He did not warn her about recoil. He offered the rifle like a test that needed no explanation. The crowd noticed the exchange and quieted even more. People stopped loading mags. Someone lowered their binoculars. The instructors paused mid-demonstration. The small sounds of a normal range day faded until only the wind moved through the targets. She looked at the rifle, then at him. He gave a single nod. Not permission, not encouragement. Recognition. She reached out and accepted the weight. Her grip was clean, confident, and without showmanship. He watched her settle the rifle against her body, adjusting to its mass with the ease of someone who had learned long ago how to work with large, unforgiving tools. He still had not spoken. He did not need to. The test had already begun. The Barrett .50 as the turning point did not announce itself with noise or drama. It simply existed in her hands, heavy and quiet, and the moment she accepted its weight, the energy on the range shifted. People who had doubted her suddenly leaned forward. People who had ignored her now paid attention. The rifle did what it always does. It demanded honesty. It forced everyone present to measure themselves against it, even if they were only watching. She held it without hesitation, her frame adjusting naturally, as if she had carried burdens far heavier than gunmetal. Her stance widened a touch, her shoulder rolled back, and her breathing slowed. She took the rifle the way someone accepts responsibility rather than attention. It was not a trophy, not a challenge she felt the need to conquer. It was simply the next thing that needed her full focus. The commander stepped back and watched her grip the receiver, place her hand on the forend, and shift her weight with deliberate control. He noted how she did not treat the Barrett like a fragile instrument, nor like a beast she had to tame. She respected the rifle's mass, but she did not fear it. That alone told him more about her than anything an introduction could have offered. The Barrett .50 has a way of separating people into two categories: those who think they are ready for it, and those who actually are. Its recoil alone can humble anyone who approaches it with ego. Its size can intimidate even seasoned shooters. But she did not tense. She did not overcompensate. She didn't try to prove anything. She simply prepared. She brought the rifle to the bench, laid it down with care, and ran her fingers along the cold metal. She checked the bipod without being told. She inspected the feed area with quick, efficient movements. These were not motions copied from someone else. They were practiced habits. People noticed. A few exchanged looks. One of the younger shooters muttered something about her being stronger than she looked. Another whispered that she must have trained somewhere serious. No one knew the truth, and she didn't offer it. She stayed focused on the rifle, not the attention gathering behind her. The Barrett sat on the bench like a quiet giant. Even its silhouette commanded patience. The long barrel pointed downrange, its presence pulling every wandering gaze along with it. She adjusted the bipod legs, making small corrections that showed she understood how even slight unevenness could throw off stability. The commander watched closely, hands on his hips, saying nothing. When she finally lowered herself behind the rifle, the crowd held their breath. She settled into position with measured grace. Her movements were not showy or rushed. She tucked the stock into her shoulder and aligned her body with the bore. The eye patch forced her to rely solely on her good eye, yet she did not seem hindered by it. If anything, it sharpened her focus. Her remaining eye locked onto the scope like the rest of the world no longer existed. She adjusted the scope height, ran the bolt, and listened to the clean metallic slide. The sound cut through the air like a blade. It was crisp, final, a signal that she had entered a different level of attention. The commander watched her breathing pattern. Slow, intentional, controlled. She waited through a full inhale and exhale before touching the trigger. Not a test pull, not a nervous brush, but a careful placement of her finger, as if acknowledging the rifle's seriousness. The Barrett sat ready, its potential held in that thin line between stillness and power. People shifted behind her, but stayed silent. The air felt thick. Dust settled around her boots. A bird somewhere near the tree-line stopped singing. All of it fed into the moment. She did not ask for guidance. She did not glance back for approval. The rifle had become an extension of her posture, her breath, her intention. The commander recognized the transition instantly. He had seen it in some of the best shooters he ever trained. The quiet moment when the gun stops being an object and becomes a tool that follows the shooter's command without hesitation. Her good eye narrowed, tracking the steel plate nearly 1,000 yards away. Wind pushed lightly across the range, ruffling a few flags. She stepped into the rhythm of the environment. Her shoulders relaxed. Her grip steadied. The Barrett rested against the earth and against her, forming a line of purpose that ran straight down range. The turning point was not the shot she had yet to take. It was the moment she settled behind the rifle and the entire range realized she belonged there more than most of them ever had. She didn't need validation. She didn't seek attention. She simply owned the space the second the Barrett lay in her hands. The crowd's shift from doubt to awe did not happen all at once. It came in small waves, each one pushed forward by something they saw in her body language, her control, or the unmistakable steadiness that settled over her as she worked with the Barrett. At first, the spectators kept their distance, hanging back with crossed arms and raised brows, still unsure what to make of the woman with the eye patch. They whispered theories, some confident, some careless, all based on what they thought they knew about shooters and who belonged behind a rifle like that. She ignored all of it, not in a defiant way, but in the way someone does when the noise around them does not register as important. Her focus rested solely on the rifle, the wind, the target, and the space between them. People sensed that focus, even if they did not immediately understand it. Doubt hung in the air, but so did an odd anticipation, like everyone was waiting for a mistake she refused to make. A few of the more experienced shooters watched her with a different kind of attention. They noticed the details others missed. How she brought her elbows in tight to build a stable platform. How she aligned her spine behind the rifle to handle recoil more efficiently. How her breathing slowed to a rhythm that matched the calmest moments on the range. They started nudging each other, quietly adjusting their own expectations. Someone near the back muttered that she was doing too much with her setup, but another man shook his head and pointed out that her form was clean. The comments shifted from judgment to curiosity. People leaned forward just a little more. Arms uncrossed. Eyes narrowed in concentration. The range was no longer looking for a slip-up. They were trying to figure out who she was. The turning point in the crowd's mood deepened when she checked the wind without relying on anyone else. She glanced at the mirage in the distance, the small flags, the subtle sway of grass at the far end of the range. She made adjustments like she had done this under far worse conditions. A few people exchanged looks that carried the same message. They had underestimated her. Even her silence added to the effect. She did not chatter nervously or ask the commander questions meant to impress. She stayed grounded, hands steady, expression calm. The longer she remained composed, the more the crowd reconsidered their early assumptions. She was not guessing. She was not pretending. Every action had purpose. The commander noticed it too. His posture shifted from evaluation to interest. He stepped back slightly to give her room, but he also angled his body so he could study the reactions forming behind him. He knew the look in their eyes. He had seen it when his team watched someone rise above expectations. It was the quiet realization that they were witnessing something rare. When she leaned into the scope and adjusted her position a final time, the crowd fell into a hush that was not forced. People naturally quieted themselves, the same way they might before a crucial moment in a competition or a ceremony. The air felt tighter. Not tense, just charged. Doubt was fading, replaced by the kind of respect that builds itself without being asked for. Someone whispered that the recoil would knock her off the bench. Another whispered back that she looked too steady for that. A few of the instructors further down the line paused their lessons and turned to watch. They stood still, their students forgotten. Even the ones who had handled the Barrett before sensed something different in how she prepared. She shifted her cheek weld slightly, aligning herself with the scope in a way that seemed instinctive rather than coached. Her grip settled naturally. Her shoulders relaxed but did not sag. She inhaled slow, then let the breath slip out in a steady stream. The range felt suspended. No one wanted to break the moment by moving, coughing, or rustling gear. The awe grew slowly but undeniably. People began to recognize that she carried an experience none of them had accounted for. They did not know where it came from, but they could see the shape of it in how she managed the rifle. Skepticism drained away until only a silent respect remained. She had not fired a single shot yet, and still the crowd found themselves adjusting their view of her. The eye patch no longer read as a vulnerability. It read as a clue to a story none of them had the courage to assume they understood. The Barrett was no longer a symbol meant to test her. It was now the measure revealing who she already was. The shift from doubt to awe was not dramatic or loud. It happened in the quiet moments when people recognized competence that required no announcement. When the strangers around her realized she carried more certainty in her movements than most of them carried in their words. And as she settled deeper behind the rifle, the awe continued to grow, filling the space where doubt had once been. The shot that changed the room started long before her finger touched the trigger. It began in the stillness she created while settling into position, a stillness so complete that even the people who had come to the range for casual practice now found themselves frozen. She took her time, but not in a hesitant way. It was the pace of someone who knew the power of patience. Every small adjustment narrowed the gap between her intention and the steel plate nearly 1,000 yards away. Her breathing steadied again, that slow rise and fall that matched the calm she carried. Her hands rested with a balance that made the heavy Barrett look almost cooperative. The weight of the rifle settled into the bench, into her shoulder, into the earth itself. Nothing about the moment felt rushed. Nothing about her posture suggested doubt. She had reached a point of complete connection with the rifle, the target, and the moment itself. The crowd had moved from curiosity to awe, but now they edged toward something different. A quiet kind of suspense. No one spoke. No one shifted their stance. The commander, who had given her the rifle without a word, now watched with a focus that bordered on reverence. He knew what it looked like when a shooter aligned every element of themselves with the shot they were about to take. He had seen it in combat, in training, and in rare moments from people who carried a deeper story than they ever told. She had that look. The wind brushed lightly across the range, enough to matter, but not enough to challenge someone who understood how to read its patterns. She watched the mirage again, then adjusted her dope with a calm precision that made several onlookers blink. A few of them whispered questions to each other, asking how she knew to make that correction, but none of them dared speak loud enough for her to hear. Her focus demanded respect. She shifted her left hand forward, tightened her shoulder, and settled into the final millimeters that separated readiness from commitment. The Barrett sat still, almost like it was waiting for her permission to unleash its power. Her good eyes softened in the scope, not strained, not tense, just clear. The steel plate in the distance shimmered slightly under the sun. When she touched the trigger, it was a measured contact. She did not pull. She did not jerk. She pressed with the kind of discipline you see in people who have learned to control more than just a firearm. Her breath reached the bottom of its exhale. The world contracted to a thin line between her finger and the target. The shot broke. The sound hit the air like a wave. The Barrett thundered with a force that rattled through every chest on the line. Dust jumped from the ground. A shock rippled through the berm. Even the people who had fired the rifle before felt the power differently this time, as if her shot carried an extra weight none of them had expected. And she did not flinch. The recoil hit her shoulder with its usual authority, but she absorbed it with perfect alignment. No stumble, no grimace. Her body rocked back in a controlled motion and returned to place like she had done it hundreds of times before. The commander watched her absorb the blow with the smoothness of a seasoned marksman, and something in his expression shifted from curiosity to absolute confirmation. People blinked, stunned. Some inhaled sharply. One man actually stepped back, startled not by the noise, but by her absolute control. Whispered doubts that had lingered earlier were gone. What replaced them was silence filled with a newfound understanding. But the shot was not finished yet. The long second between pulling the trigger and seeing the result stretched across the range. People held their breath without realizing it. Dust drifted. Heat shimmered. The sound of the Barrett rolled away into the open air. Then the impact came. A sharp, unmistakable clang echoed from the steel plate in the distance. Not a graze. Not a lucky strike. A clean, centered hit that sent the target rocking on its hinges. The sound cut through the silence with a precision that matched the shot itself. Some people exhaled in disbelief. One man let out a low curse. Another simply shook his head, unable to put words to what he had just witnessed. She stayed motionless behind the rifle, absorbing the echoes, her eyes still on the scope. She did not raise her head for praise or look around for approval. She remained exactly where she was, as if the shot had been a conversation between her and the rifle, and now she was listening for its answer. The crowd had changed. Completely. The moment the steel rang out, the room, open as it was, felt transformed. Doubt had died, and something larger had taken its place. The shot had spoken louder than any story she could have told. The truth everyone learned about her that day did not come from her name or her background or any story she chose to share. It came from the way she carried herself after the shot, the way she rose from behind the Barrett without fanfare, and the steady calm that stayed with her as the crowd tried to understand what they had just witnessed. She did not smile, brag, or soak in the shock around her. She simply lifted her head from the scope and let the silence settle. It was the kind of silence that follows something honest, not something loud. People waited for her to show some sign of excitement, but excitement was never her goal. Her breathing stayed even. Her posture stayed balanced. She sat back from the rifle as if she had done nothing more than complete a task she had set out to do. It was that calm that told the real story. She was not surprised by the hit. She was not proud in a loud way. She had expected the outcome because she trusted her skill and her process, even with a crowd full of strangers watching. The commander was the first to truly understand. He saw it in her eyes, in her lack of reaction, in the quiet control that did not fade after the recoil. He knew the difference between a lucky shot and a practiced one. He also knew the difference between a practiced shot and one shaped by experience deeper than the practice range. She carried the latter. It lived in her posture, in her breathing, in the way she treated the rifle with respect but not reverence. He stepped closer, not to congratulate her, but to acknowledge her. He gave her a small nod, the kind only one skilled shooter gives another. She met his gaze and returned the nod with a level calm that said she understood exactly what it meant. No words passed between them, yet the exchange said more than any conversation could. The crowd, however, needed a moment to let the truth sink in. They kept staring at her, trying to reconcile the woman with the eye patch and the quiet presence with the precision they had just witnessed. A few people started talking again, but their tones had changed. The skepticism had drained out of their voices. Respect grew in its place, slow and steady. They stopped trying to guess her story. They started accepting that it was bigger than their assumptions. Someone asked the commander who she was, but he simply shrugged. It was not a dismissive gesture. It was a reminder that her identity was not necessary for understanding what mattered. Her skill spoke for itself. Her composure completed the message. Everything else was her own business. She rose from the bench and checked the rifle with the same deliberate care she had shown before the shot. She cleared the chamber, checked the bolt, and laid the Barrett back on the rest without any sign of strain from handling its weight. People watched her move with the smoothness of someone who knew how to manage tools far stronger than themselves. She didn't rush. She didn't pause to soak in attention. Her motion stayed focused on safety and respect for the rifle. One of the younger shooters stepped forward as if to ask her how she learned to do what she did, but he lost his nerve halfway through and stepped back. It wasn't fear. It was a realization that he had witnessed something shaped by years he could not guess at, experiences he had not lived, lessons she had earned the hard way, not the easy way. He sensed that asking her about it might be like trying to summarize a book by reading only the last page. Others followed her with their eyes as she gathered her gear. The eye patch no longer looked like a limitation. It looked like a marker of resilience that none of them could fully measure. Whatever she had been through, she had come out with her focus sharpened instead of diminished. That truth was clearer than any story she could have offered. Even the instructors who had trained hundreds of shooters found themselves humbled. They recognized that her precision had not come from a textbook or a class. It came from experience earned under conditions far more serious than recreational practice. They nodded to her as she walked past, instinctively offering the respect reserved for people who carried a certain kind of weight on their shoulders. The truth they all learned was not about where she came from. It was not about what happened to her eye or who taught her to shoot. The truth was simpler and deeper. She belonged on that line. She belonged behind that rifle. She carried a steadiness that could not be faked, a discipline that could not be borrowed, a presence that reshaped any room, even an open range. She walked away with the same quiet confidence she arrived with, leaving behind a group of people who now understood that they had witnessed something real, something earned, something rare. And though she said nothing about herself, everyone there walked away with a truth they would not forget.